Hello and welcome to the Controller Chronicles. In this installment, I'm taking a look at the Capcom Fighter Power Stick for the Super Nintendo. Released by Capcom, developed by Capcom, this stick was released in 1992 as big promotion for Street Fighter II, as that was the biggest game of the time. This arcade stick works for both the Super Nintendo and regular Nintendo Entertainment System, as well as a whole bunch of other adapters that were made for it that work for other systems such as the MSX, Genesis, FM Towns Marty, X68000, and many other computers and arcade and consoles at the time. There was one for the 3DO even. Now, Capcom achieved this by using this universal design where you simply take the cord out and plug in a new cord, and that goes to whatever system. Now, it's kind of interesting because no other company ever tried anything like this, so it's rather unique. This box here is, a little bit beat up, but it definitely shows the art style of the time. It says on its features, it features a 4 or 8-way directional movement. It actually has a switch here to switch it from 8-way to 4-way. You'd only ever want it on 4-way if you were playing games like Pac-Man or Galaga or early arcade games like that, if you don't want the diagonals, because if you have it in 4 mode instead of 8, if you move the arcade stick anywhere to the diagonals, either up, left, down, right, etc., etc. What happens is the buttons just don't get registered. It's like you're just pressing left or just pressing down, and that makes playing, a bunch of spaceship shooters or basically anything really frustrating because you're meant to be using the diagonals. So make sure you never have it on 4-way if you pick up one of these things. It has 3 turbo settings and also has 3 slow motion settings, and that's for the start button. And yeah, there's not really much I can say about the box here, except for the fact that the artwork is pretty awful. Like, look at the art of Ryu here, and even worse, Chun-Li. Ugh. Alright, with all that said, let's show you the arcade stick itself. So it's right here. This is my Capcom Fighter arcade stick, and you'll notice right away that it differs quite a bit from the stock image that's used on the box. And that's because these buttons that are on the stick originally are junk. They essentially are these little plastic caps that attach over top of these little tiny micro switches. These things right here, they are actually micro switches, but they are incredibly junk. These are basically like the lowest common denominator of micro switches, of some things that you could actually call a micro switch. If you put the actuator right on top of the micro switch itself, what happens is it's just making mechanical contact, and it's really feels kind of junky. It's just not very good. Unfortunately, because of just how small these things are, the PCB basically sits right on top of the case, not allowing much room at all for actual modding to add in buttons. So to get around that, what I had to do was I really had to force the buttons in there and bend their pins down and solder them up with some wires, and that creates a little bit of stress. And that's a problem because not all the buttons don't like stress, and you need to press them down a little bit. So in order to get around that, I actually had to mod in a small little metal bar here along the back here, and that lifts up the case just enough to allow the buttons to work properly without causing them mechanical stress. And the other thing I did was I replaced the joystick itself. The joystick originally that came with it is this thing right here. This isn't too bad of a joystick, except it breaks one of the cardinal sins that I have with arcade sticks. It uses a square gate. And not just any square gate. This is a massive square gate used in American-style arcade cabinets. So that means if you mod it with a Japanese stick, the restrictor gate that you'll get for those is much smaller and won't actually fit over this. Normally that wouldn't be a problem because I just drill some holes through it and call it a day. But in this case, I couldn't do that because this stick is mounted from the bottom of the case as opposed to the top of the case. Now that's extremely unusual because most arcade sticks are mounted from the top of the control panel. They're mounted with screws either going down through the control panel or screws coming up through the control panel. This was mounted to the bottom of the control panel and just sort of rests on the top of the case. And that's a problem because, I didn't want to drill holes through the top of the case, and ruin the aesthetics of it. But, and also because it's like just thin plastic, there'd be really nothing to support it. So because of that, I couldn't use a standard Sanwa arcade stick as I would it in my other arcade sticks that I've modded. And because of that, I had to try and figure out another solution. So the stick I went with is a Sumitsu LS3201, and I did that because Sumitsu actually allows it to be mounted either or mounted from the bottom or the top. Top is out of the option, or is out of the picture for this arcade stick in particular. So I had to do it from the bottom. You actually see if you flip it over. These are actually the holes that it gets, or these are actually the holes that it gets modded in, and the stick just sits in the middle there. And I added some glue in to, just make it sit and so it will never move around because it wasn't actually meant to use anywhere near real arcade quality parts. So because of all that, this stick is now fantastic and ready to go, right? Yeah, as mentioned, it originally came with this crazy adapter that gets plugged into the back of it that allows it to be used on either Super Nintendo, Nintendo Entertainment System, MSX, Sega Genesis, etc., etc. But the stick I bought only came with a Super Nintendo cord, and that would be a problem because I really wanted to use it for the NES as well, and Famicom. But luckily, because it uses the Super Nintendo cord, and it has a Super Nintendo cord, I could use my crazy adapter that I've made that allows me to use a Super Nintendo cord, or Super Nintendo controller on the regular Nintendo Entertainment System, or the Famicom, as I have in this case. So with all that said, let's show you some gameplay. I have in my Super Nintendo right now R-Type 3. R-Type 3 is a fantastic shoot-'em-up game, and I have it there for another reason, because it also has a fantastic option setting that shows you basically the button configuration. And once I press buttons on the arcade stick, you'll be able to see just how responsive and instant it is. So with all that said, let's plug this in and play some of this. So here's the Super Nintendo cord, plugged in like that. They give you quite a bit of cord here. This is actually 6 feet long, which is very long for a Japanese arcade stick. Most come with only a 3-foot cord. There we go. Plug that in, turn it on, and here we go. Oops. You gotta do that every now and then. Okay. So here it is, R-Type 3. Go to options. Now I'm gonna focus, and you can see the controller layout here. So here is the L, here is the X, here is the R, Y, B, and A. We're all 6 at once. Very responsive. So I'll show you that from the arcade stick's perspective. Okay, now we're going to boot the game up. So you have the select, start button, the mode buttons, your 6 action buttons, the turbo buttons, and turbo off. So here we go. That effect is so cool, even to this day. Now, as you can see, this works great for R-Type, and this will work for fighting games or platformers or whatever else. Here is the Turbo Fire enabled. What else is kind of neat is if you look at the arcade stick itself, when Turbo Fire is enabled, there is a little LED that shows up to show you that you're pressing down the button. Disable that, put it on B here, or that's the A button I should say. Very cool, right? Alright. Next, I'll show you something else that's kind of neat about this thing. Unplug this. Move this over. Now, we're going to take that crazy contraption of mine and take the controller port, adapt it in, and on the other end, Famicom, or NES in this case. Plug that in, and we're going to play some Rockman 1 or Mega Man 1 with a Super Nintendo arcade stick. Love this game. Alright, so what actually happens when you use a Super Nintendo arcade stick or Super Nintendo controller on the NES, the Y button becomes the NES B button, and the B button becomes the NES A button. This makes it perfect for playing NES games. Here's Turbo Fire. Here's the first Turbo Fire setting I should show. Here's the second. And here's the third. lastly, I'm going to demo how useful this is for different types of games, such as RPGs. Here is Final Fantasy III, the Japanese version for the Famicom. The original Final Fantasy III, not the one for the Super Nintendo, as we all know as Final Fantasy III, or Final Fantasy VI, actually. But enough of that. Let's plug this in, play some of this. Oops. Here we go. Here we go. So here is just a typical RPG, right? But let's get into a battle. Let's go to my airship here. Go to the ground. Let's get into the forest here. Looking for a random battle. Now, in a random battle, you have to press the A button every single time that you tell your attacker to do something. But let's make the turbo button the A button. Or make the A button turbo, I should say. Now I just hold the button down and it does the rest by itself. Alright, so with all that said, let's give you some final thoughts. The Capcom Fighter Power Stick is a really awesome arcade stick, especially if you can mod it. Stock, it's not so hot, but once modded, it works great, it looks great, very classic 90s style. The one bad part about it is it has basically no weight to it. The whole thing basically does not have a metal plate inside of it, so it's just the weight of its own casing plus its PCB and the buttons and such. Which is a real shame because this thing, you know, is otherwise perfect, now that it's modded anyway. It's fairly rare, so don't expect to find these, you know, just on the street lying around, but then again, I found mine complete in box at my local game store, so I guess they must be out there. So thanks for watching, guys, and if you haven't yet, check out my 2,000 subscribers a special contest video that I have, and I'll see you next time.